The morning fog off the Mississippi did little to soften the sharp lines of the Devereaux mansion on Esplanade Avenue. To Huck, rising in his tiny, airless room above the carriage house, the mist felt like the city itself, a veil over a truth everyone pretended not to see. At 16, his memories of the war were the distant thunder of a childhood storm, and the emancipation was a word he'd heard in church, a promise that had rusted like an old hinge. He pulled on his stiff livery, the Devereaux crest itching against his neck. Down in the kitchen, the heat was already a living thing. His mother, Celeste, moved between the massive stove and the butcher's block, her hands a blur of kneading and chopping. She didn't look up as he entered. "The silver, Huck," she said, her voice low. "The breakfast service. Be sure the napkin rings are polished. Madame is entertaining the banker from New York today." "Yes, Mama." His words were swallowed by the hiss of boiling water. His father, Elijah, was already in the stable, brushing down the pair of bay geldings with a rhythmic, weary cadence. He gave Huck a slow nod. "Coach needs a wipe down. No dust. Monsieur Devereaux has eyes like a hawk." This was their freedom. Not the wide-open sky Huck dreamed of, but a series of small, polished tasks in a gilded world they were forbidden to touch. The Devereaux were progressive. They paid a wage $12 a month in theory. But Huck had never held a full month's pay. There were deductions for the room, for the uniforms, for the training Monsieur provided, for a broken vase Huck's sister had dusted near a year ago. The ledger, kept by Monsieur, was a maze of invisible debt. As Huck laid the gleaming table in the dining room, he watched old Monsieur Devereaux read the Times-Democrat. The headline boomed about Northern capital and Southern recovery. Huck's eyes scanned the smaller print below, a notice for a vagrancy arrest in the French Quarter. He knew that man. Had refused a service contract with the LeBlanc family. Now he was a criminal. Madame Devereaux swept in, a vision in lavender silk. "The roses are wilting, Huck. Tell the gardener." Her gaze passed over him as if he were a piece of the furniture. To her, he was not Huck, the boy who loved to watch the steamboats on the river and could fix any clock in the house. He was the help, a familiar, reliable shadow. That afternoon, while fetching a parcel from the apothecary, Huck saw her. Cora. She was carrying a basket of laundry for the Lemoine family, her back straight despite the weight. Their eyes met across the crowded street. A quick, fierce smile from her, a spark in the gray New Orleans afternoon. Cora, whose mother worked in the same kitchen as his, who whispered to him about secret schools in Trem, who carried a tattered copy of the New Orleans Tribune folded beneath her apron. "Your mama saving?" she asked softly as they passed near the market stalls. "Trying," Huck murmured. "The ledger, they make the numbers lie," Cora said, her jaw tightening. "My Uncle Joe, he left his contract. They found him near the bayou, said he fell." The unspoken word runaway hung between them. "You talking about leaving?" Huck asked, a thrill of fear and hope in his chest. "Not just leaving," Cora whispered, stepping closer, knowing. "My cousin Ben, he got a job on the docks, real wages. He says there's a man there, a freedman lawyer from up north. Hess looking at contracts, real ones." Before Huck could answer, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Cora, you lazy girl, those linens won't deliver themselves." Madame Lemoine stood on her gallery, eyes narrowed. Cora's defiant posture melted into the expected deference. "Yes, Mom." She shot Huck one last meaningful look and hurried away. That night, as Huck cleaned the last of the dinner silver, he heard raised voices from Monsieur's study. The banker from New York was still there. "Assuredly, the labor question is settled." Monsieur Devereaux's voice was smooth, confident. "The Negro is by nature suited to service. We provide structure, morality. These contracts protect them from their own imprudence. It's a benevolent system. And profitable," the banker chuckled. "Your ledgers show remarkable efficiency." Huck's hand tightened around a silver fork. "Benevolent system." The words coated his tongue like ash. He thought of Cora's Uncle Joe, He thought of the ledger with its phantom debts. He looked out the window at the ornate iron fence surrounding the Devereaux property. It was not locked, but where in all of New Orleans could he step where that invisible contract did not follow? The following Sunday, Huck's family was granted 2 hours of liberty for church. They didn't go to the grand cathedral on Jackson Square, where the Devereaux worshipped. They walked to Trim, to a small clapboard church that hummed with a different spirit. Here the hymns were not just prayers, they were codes. Steal away meant a meeting. Wade in the water spoke of escape routes. After the service, Huck found Cora near the old oak tree in the churchyard. She nodded toward a man speaking quietly with the preacher. He was older, with a careful bearing and eyes that missed nothing. "That's him," Cora murmured. "Mr. Samuel Hawkins, from Boston." Mr. Hawkins' voice was low but clear. "The law is a weapon they've turned against you, but it can be a shield. The key is in the words, the specific words." He held up a folded document, an apprenticeship contract for one Benjamin Harris, aged 14, to learn the trade of carpentry from Master Edward Leroy. It binds him for 7 years. It mentions food and lodging. It does not mention wages. It does not define carpentry. For 3 years, Benjamin has fetched water, chopped wood, and scrubbed floors. That is not carpentry. That is fraud. A murmur went through the small group. Huck felt a strange new sensation, not just anger, but the sharp, clear focus of understanding. "They count on you not reading," Hawkins continued. "They count on fear. But the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1875, though weakened, still holds. A contract without true mutual benefit is not a contract. It is peonage. It is illegal." Afterward, Huck dared to approach. "Sir." "Our contract, the Devereaux. It has wages written, but the deductions—" Hawkins' gaze was kind but piercing. "Let me guess. Room, board, training, breakage, all unspecified sums determined solely by the employer?" Huck nodded. "A classic device. The wage is a phantom. The debt is real only to you. Do you have a copy of your contract?" Huck shook his head, a flush of shame heating his face. Had never even thought to ask for one. "The first step," Hawkins said, "is to see the chain. Then you learn its weak points." Back at the mansion, Huck was a storm of quiet turmoil. That night, as Monsieur Devereaux smoked his cigar on the veranda, Huck gathered his courage. "Monsieur, might I have a copy of my employment agreement?" "To better understand my obligations, sir." The silence that followed was colder than the river fog. Monsieur Devereaux slowly turned, his eyes narrowing. "Your obligations, boy, are to do as you are told. Your understanding is not required. The agreement is between me and your father. Do you question my stewardship?" The threat was velvet-covered but solid as stone. "No, sir," Huck said, lowering his gaze. "Good. See to the lamps." The next day, the tension in the house was a taut wire. Elijah was given the most back-breaking tasks in the stable. Celeste was criticized for oversalting the soup. The message was clear. Curiosity was a weed to be scorched. Huck felt the walls of the mansion, once merely oppressive, now felt actively malicious. The polished banister, the crystal doorknobs, all were part of the apparatus of his captivity. He met Cora by the old cistern behind the market 2 days later. He asked for the contract, she said, her voice full of awe and fear. Shed heard from the kitchen gossip network that connected every great house in the city. "And was refused," Huck said bitterly. "But you asked," she insisted. "You named the thing. That's the start." She reached into her basket and pulled out a small cloth-wrapped package. "From Mr. Hawkins. For you." Inside was a book, the Common School Primer. "He says learning to read the words is the first act of taking back your name," Cora whispered. Huck hid the primer beneath a loose floorboard in his room. At night, by the sliver of moonlight through his small window, he traced the letters. A, B, C, cat, dog, man, freedom. The words were clumsy in his mind, but they were his. They were a secret weapon. He was beginning to see that the true battle for his soul was not fought in the fields, but on the page. The paper chain could only bind him if he couldn't read its text. The heat of a New Orleans summer descended, heavy and suffocating. In the Devereaux kitchen, it was an inferno. Celeste swayed one afternoon, her hand gripping the edge of the table, a sheen of sweat on her brow. "Mama?" Huck rushed to her side. "It's nothing, child. The heat," she murmured, but her eyes were clouded with pain. When Madame Devereaux was informed, her response was delivered through the housekeeper. "If she is unwell, she cannot be in the kitchen. Deductions will be made for a replacement cook. She may rest in her quarters." No doctor was summoned. Illness, like broken china, was another line in the ledger. That evening, Huck heard his parents arguing in hushed, strained tones. "We have to go, Elijah." Celeste's voice was a weak thread of steel. "This is not living. Huck is becoming a man in a house that wants him to stay a boy." "And go where, Celeste?" Elijah's voice was rough with despair. "To be vagrants? To have the police hound us? At least here we have walls from the rain and food, however meager." "The devil you know is still a devil," she finished. A fit of coughing seized her. Huck couldn't stay still. He slipped out, navigating the back alleys to the cramped cottage in Trame where Cora lived with her mother and two younger siblings. He told her of his mother's illness, his father's fear. Cora's face was grim. "My mother heard from the washwoman at the Deschapelles' house. Old man Deschanel had a fit last week. They brought in Dr. Lemond from Rue Royale, paid him $20. She took Huck's hand. "Your mama's worth is a deduction. His is a fee." The injustice was a physical blow. "Hawkins, does he know a doctor? Maybe. But it's more than that now, Huck. It's time." Her eyes gleamed in the dim light of a single candle. "There's a group. Not just talking, doing. They meet at the smithy on Rampart Street. The Free Labor Collective. They find real work, upriver. They have a guide." The smithy was a place of fire and shadow. The man at the anvil was not a preacher, but a giant of a man named Isaac, whose arms were corded with muscle from shaping iron. Around him stood a dozen men and women, their faces etched with the same weary determination Huck saw in his own home. "The river is not just water," Isaac was saying, his voice a low rumble. "It's a road, north to St. Louis, west to Texas. There are farms in Kansas that want field hands for real wages with real contracts. There are factories in Indiana where a man's labor buys bread for his family, not just pays down a master's imaginary debt." A woman spoke up, her voice trembling but clear. "My boy, he's 12. They have him on an apprenticeship at the printer. He sweeps and fetches. He'll never learn a trade. They'll own him till he's a man, and then they'll claim he owes for his raising." Isaac nodded. "The law Hawkins talks of, it's a fine weapon for some, but it moves slow, and the judges here, they are the planters' cousins and brothers. Sometimes the only law that answers is the law of movement, of distance." He laid out a plan, a fishing boat, leaving from a secluded dock downriver, not the busy port, a payment to the captain, a freedman who ran this dangerous route, a journey to Baton Rouge, then overland. It was dangerous. Patrols watched the river. Employers paid informants. Capture meant jail, or worse. "We leave in 2 weeks, Isaac said, "on the new moon. Tell no one who does not need to know. Bring only what you can carry. Your past is a weight you must be willing to drop in the river." Huck walked home through the clinging night, his heart pounding a desperate rhythm. Freedom. It was no longer a word in a dusty book. It was a fishing boat on a dark river. It was a terrifying, glorious chance. But it meant leaving his sick mother, convincing his cautious father, and stepping into a black unknown where the only promise was that it was not here. The mansion on Esplanade was a cage, but it was a known cage. The river was freedom, but it was also a hungry, endless dark. The next week was a torture of normalcy. Huck performed his duties like an automaton, his mind churning with plans and fears. He stole glances at his mother, noting the deepening hollows under her eyes. He tried to read the primer, but the letters swam before him, overshadowed by the immense decision before them. The breaking point came on Friday. Monsieur Devereux called Elijah into his study. Huck, polishing the hallway sconces, listened through the cracked door. "Elijah, your work has been adequate," Monsieur began, his tone implying the opposite. "But the costs of maintaining your family are becoming burdensome. The doctor's visit for Celeste, the reduced productivity. I am restructuring the terms." Huck heard the rustle of paper. "This is a new agreement. It consolidates your family's debts. It extends your period of service to cover them. Huck's apprenticeship in carriage maintenance is formalized here, a 10-year term. His wages will go directly to paying down the family balance. 10 years. Huck's blood ran cold. They were going to legally bind his entire future, chain his youth to this house. "Sir," Elijah's voice was choked. 10 years. He'll be a man. He deserves a chance. He deserves the stability I provide." Monsieur's voice sharpened. "Sign it, Elijah, or you can take your sick wife and your impertinent son and find your fortune on the street. See how long you last before the vagrancy laws take you." That night, in their quarters, the truth lay bare on the rough wooden table, the new contract. Celeste, feverish, stared at it with dry, bright eyes. "It is a death warrant," she whispered, "for his spirit and for mine." Elijah's shoulders were slumped in defeat. "What choice do we have?" Huck stood up, a new, unfamiliar strength straightening his spine. He looked at the primer hidden under his mattress, then at the cruel document on the table. "We have the choice Isaac spoke of," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "We run, on the new moon, 3 days from now." His parents stared at him as if seeing a stranger. "Run? To where?" Elijah asked. "To maybe," Huck said, the word hanging in the air. "It's better than this. He pointed at the contract. It was Celeste who tipped the scales. With a tremendous effort, she sat up. "The boy is right, Elijah. I will not die in this attic, my son's life signed away to pay for my fever. I would rather die on the river, trying." The resolve in her voice, the fire returned to her eyes by sheer will, broke Elijah. He nodded, a single slow tear tracing the dust on his cheek. "All right, we run." The next 48 hours were a frantic, silent ballet of preparation. Huck smuggled out small bits of food from the kitchen, hardtack dried meat. Cora, through her network, secured a precious vial of willow bark tea for Celeste's fever. They mended their sturdiest shoes and sewn their few coins into the hems of their clothing. Every creak of the floorboard, every glance from the housekeeper, felt like a thunderclap of discovery. Huck took one last risk. In Monsieur's study, while delivering firewood, he saw the family ledger lying open. His heart hammering against his ribs, he quickly traced the columns next to his father's name. The numbers were a grotesque fiction, charges for things they'd never received. Wages never fully logged. It was the proof of the lie. He couldn't take it, but he burned the image into his memory. On the night of the new moon, the sky was a bowl of black velvet, the stars smothered by cloud. It was perfect. They waited until the last carriage returned. The last lamp was extinguished in the big house. With only the clothes on their backs and their small, desperate bundles, they slipped out the servants' entrance, through the garden gate that Elijah had quietly oiled that afternoon. The city was different at this hour, alive with shadows and danger. They moved like ghosts through the familiar streets, now turned alien and menacing. Every distant footstep was a patrol. Every barking dog was an alarm. They reached the rendezvous point, a rotting wharf behind an abandoned warehouse reeking of fish and tar. The others were already there. Cora and her family, the woman from the smithy with her son, 2 other men Huck didn't know. Isaac's massive form was a pillar of calm. "The boat's coming," he murmured. "Stay low, stay silent." Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then, A soft, rhythmic splash. A shallow draft skiff emerged from the gloom, a single lantern shuttered to a sliver. The captain, a grizzled man with eyes that constantly scanned the darkness, gestured them aboard. One by one they stepped into the boat. It sat low in the water, a fragile shell against the mighty Mississippi. As Elijah helped Celeste aboard, Huck took a last look at the skyline of New Orleans, the spires of St. Louis Cathedral, the dark bulk of the mansions on Esplanade. It was the only home head ever known, a beautiful, cruel jewel box. He turned his back on it and stepped into the boat. Just as the captain prepared to push off, a shout echoed from the warehouse. A lantern flared. "Hey, you there! Stop in the name of the law!" A night watchman. Panic seized the group. "Go, now!" Isaac hissed. The captain shoved off, heaving on the oars. The skiff slid into the deeper current. Behind them, the watchman's shouts grew fainter, but he was running, likely to raise the alarm. The little boat was swept into the dark, rushing embrace of the Mississippi. They were committed. The city of false promises receded into the night. Ahead was only the river, the unknown, and the fragile, terrifying hope of a true dawn. The Mississippi at night was a world of whispers and monstrous shadows. The skiff, overloaded with hope and fear, was a leaf in the grip of a giant. Captain Renard rowed with a fierce, silent strength, keeping them close to the shadowed western bank, away from the channel where patrolled steamboats might shine a spotlight. Celeste huddled against Elijah, her shivers not just from the cold river air. Cora gripped Huck's hand, her fingers like ice. No one spoke. The only sounds were the dip of the oars, the lap of water, and the distant lonely cry of a night bird. Every minute carried them farther from the known hell, deeper into an uncertain purgatory. After what felt like an age, Renard spoke, his voice a low gravel. "We'll make for the Des Allemands landing. Got a friend there with a cart. Take you north, away from the river road. They'll be checking the docks at first light." "Thank you," Isaac rumbled from the bow. "We are in your debt." "Ain't about debt," Renard grunted. "It's about the account being wrong. Just settling the books a little." Dawn was a gray smear when they reached the landing, little more than a muddy shelf beneath cypress trees. Renard's friend, a silent, wiry man named Jacques, was waiting with a mule and a rickety cart covered with a canvas tarp. There was no time for farewells. As Huck helped his mother into the cart, Renard pressed a small, greasy pouch into Isaac's hand. "A little for the road. Don't let him see you in the towns. Stick to the swamp trails. 3 days' walk to the Lafourche crossing. Ask for the Miller farm. They're unionists. They'll help." The journey overland was a trial of mud, mosquitoes, and gnawing hunger. They slept in shifts, on damp ground, hidden in thickets, jumping at every crack of a twig. Cora's youngest brother developed a cough. Their food ran low. The bright, defiant hope of escape began to tarnish under the grinding reality of flight. They were fugitives not from slavery, but from a legal fiction. Yet the hounds, real and metaphorical, felt just as close. On the second day, as they forded a shallow, tea-colored stream, they heard the distinct sound of horses on a parallel path. Everyone froze, sinking into the brackish water up to their necks, hiding beneath overhanging branches. 2 white men on horseback, one wearing a deputy's star, rode slowly along the trail. Said they was a whole group. Cook, coachman, their brats. Old Devereaux is furious, offering $50 a head for return. Says they stole silver, one man said. They never learn, do they? The deputy chuckled. Think the swamp is better than a good roof and regular meals. Well, check the old trapper's cabin up ahead. The voices faded. Huck felt a cold fury. Stole silver. The lie was so easy for them to tell, so impossible for them to disprove. Their very existence was now a crime. They reached the Miller farm at dusk on the 3rd day. It was a modest but sturdy homestead. Mr. Miller, a man with a long beard and quiet eyes, listened to their story without interruption. He fed them stew and let them sleep in his barn. "You can stay 2 days," he said. "No more. The parish sheriff is no friend of mine, and $50 turns men's heads. He'll take you to the Lacombe ferry at dawn. From there you can get transport to the railroad at Morgan City, the Illinois Central. It goes north." "We have no tickets," Elijah said, the old defeat creeping back. Mr. Miller nodded to Isaac. "You're strong. The ferryman needs labor unloading his barge, hell pay and passage, the railroad. There are men at the yards who will let you ride the freight cars for a fee or for work. It won't be comfortable. It won't be safe. But it goes north. The freight car was a rolling coffin of heat and dust, shared with 2 other fleeing families and the stench of old livestock. But as the train wheels clacked a rhythmic song against the rails, a new feeling began to stir in Huck's chest. They were moving, under their own power, towards a destination they had chosen. Every mile that passed was a mile Monsieur Devereaux did not own. Cora sat beside him, her head on his shoulder, asleep. In her lap was the primer, now worn and smudged. Huck took it gently and opened it. In the slatted light coming through the car's walls, he sounded out the words slowly, painfully. "All men are created equal." The words tasted strange, bitter from the lie they revealed in his old life, sweet from the promise they held in this rattling northbound car. He wasn't just fleeing from something anymore. He was traveling towards the meaning of those words. The journey was no longer just about escape. It was about becoming a man who could read his own name and write his own contract with the world. The train deposited them on the outskirts of St. Louis, a city of smoke and industry that roared with a different energy than New Orleans' humid murmur. They were ragged, exhausted, and utterly unknown. But they were together. Through the network of black churches, a lifeline that stretched across the country, they found a boarding house run by a formidable widow named Sister Henderson. She took one look at their hollow eyes and offered a week's lodging in exchange for repairs to her porch. "Work is here," she said, not unkindly. "But it's work you get paid for. Real money. The stockyards need men. The laundries need women. The schools need children." She looked pointedly at Huck and Cora. The next few months were a different kind of struggle, a struggle for footing in a world of freedom that was indifferent, not maliciously designed. Elijah, his back unbent for the first time, found work at a lumber yard. The pay was in cash, counted into his palm every Friday. The first time it happened, he stood for a long moment, staring at the coins as if they were holy relics. Celeste, her health slowly returning with regular meals and the absence of constant fear, took in mending. Her stitches were fine, her reputation grew. She opened her own small ledger now, recording earnings, not debts. Huck and Cora enrolled in the Freedman School. Sitting at a desk, a slate before him, Huck felt a joy so sharp it was almost pain. He learned arithmetic to manage real wages. He read history, his history now, not just the master's. He learned about the Reconstruction amendments, the laws men like Hawkins tried to wield. The words had power, but he now understood they were only as strong as the people who could claim them. At night he worked with Isaac, who had started a small carpentry cooperative. Huck learned to measure twice, cut once, to build something that would last. The smell of sawdust was the smell of creation, not of servitude. One evening, a year after their flight, Huck received a letter forwarded by Mr. Hawkins in New Orleans. It was from a law firm in Boston, inspired by Hawkins' reports. They were compiling a national report on post-war peonage and labor contracts. They wanted a statement, his story, his mother's illness, the ledger, the flight. "They want to use our names," Huck said to his family, gathered in their small but clean apartment. Sunlight, real sunlight, streamed through an unbarred window. "Let them," Celeste said, her voice strong. "Let the world know the price of the sugar in their tea, the polish on their silver." Elijah nodded. "Our truth is not a debt we owe. It's a story we own." Huck wrote the letter. He described the invisible ledger, the paper chains, the cold refusal of a doctor. He described the fear, the river, the freight car. He did not write with bitterness alone, but with the hard-won clarity of a young man who had crossed from a world of imposed fiction into one of difficult, beautiful fact. He signed it not just Huck, but with his full name, learned and claimed, Henry Ulysses Charles King. He was no longer the Devereux boy. He was his own man. The past was not erased. The memories of the mansion, the whispers in the churchyard, the terror on the river, they were part of him. But they were no longer chains. They were the foundation upon which he was building. He was learning a trade. He was reading books. He was walking down a street where no one knew his master, and his future was not a line in another man's ledger, but a story he was writing himself, one honest day, one learned word, at a time. If you were moved by Huck's journey from invisible chains to self-determined freedom, please share this story to keep these important histories alive. Subscribe to Tales of Slavery for more powerful, true stories of resilience and the enduring fight for human dignity.